The Venice Biennale, the biggest art party in the world and the most glamorous one here in the most beautiful city in Europe. It's 104 years old and counting. Initially, when it was set up, the host nations were all the great Western producers of art: Great Britain, France, Germany, America, and of course the host nation Italy. But in the post-war period, a host of other nations have joined in, including of course Australia from the 1950s, and this year there are more nations represented than ever before. Also in the post-war period, it's become a kind of Geiger counter for who's sharp at the cutting edge of international art. In 1948, Henry Moore made his reputation here. In 1964, it was Robert Rauschenberg. And everyone this year is looking to see who's going to become the new international art star. The first stop in the Venice Biennale is always the home pavilion, and I've decided to miss out the British Pavilion and head straight here to the Australian Pavilion, where Howard Arkley is showing. Now, he's a distinguished painter, but his work I've never seen, or rather I've only seen it in reproduction. I think this is a very strong show. It's bold, vivacious painting, it fuses the decorative with different codes of representation, and it puts suburbia firmly on the Venetian map. What I like too is the fact that each of these pavilions, although they have a kind of grandeur to them, are all domestic spaces in some ways, and the art never really reflects that. And Howard Arkley's work certainly does. Also, certainly the word from British critics like Jonathan Watkins, who was based in Australia, and Richard Calver-Caresi from the Museum of Modern Art in Edinburgh, is that this is a very hot show. I just wonder how Australian you think your own sensibility is. Now, I know that's the kind of question that a critic should answer rather than pose, but I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think it is Australian. It's where 95% of Australians actually live. They don't actually live out in the desert in Ayers Rock, etc., that you see on nature documentaries. And Australians get my work straight away. They understand what's being said, and they understand they're not being put down either. It's not satirical, what I'm interested in. It's a love-hate relationship I have with the suburbs.
From an outsider's viewpoint, the response has been very positive about your show, but what kind of vibes have you had?
Absolutely fantastic. I couldn't be happier. You can tell by the amount of time that people spend in the exhibition. I mean, if they don't like it, they'll go in and out, but people actually spend quite a lot of time and make very positive comments when they come out.
Is there any sense in which Venice might have an impact on your work in months or years to come?
Well, I mean, who can tell? When I first visited Paris in 1977, that influenced my work in a way that I didn't imagine. I can't imagine it right while I'm sitting here now, but that's the nature of art, who can say?
So the gondola paintings may
still be around the corner, yes.
This is the British Pavilion, and the work on show inside is by a young painter called Gary Hume, who's turned the pavilion inside out to a certain extent by putting these panel paintings, painted on aluminium with house paint, on the outside. These are of doors, which is what Hume did 6 or 7 years ago when he first came to prominence back in Britain. He's part of a young generation who went to Goldsmiths Art School, who are called the YBAs, the Young British Artists, people like Damien Hirst and Rachel Whiteread. He's far and away the youngest painter on show in any of the big national pavilions, and what we're looking at inside is work done over the last 3 or 4 years where he's painting supermodels like Kate Moss, flora, fauna, and a gigantic series of nudes that uses the line in an interesting and some say erotic way for the first time in Hume's career. The portrait of Kate Moss that you produced there has no face. It's aluminium that's been buffed or erased. Why is the face not there?
Couldn't get it.
It's as simple as that. You couldn't get it.
Yeah, I mean, so I then had to think my way around it. Well, what can I do if I can't get it?
But I find that fascinating because when you look at that picture, your own face isn't reflected, whereas there are other parts of that surface where you can see yourself or see your body.
Yeah, I mean, all that's hopefully in there, and sort of like you can start to read it as something. You can only ever work within your limitations, and my limitation was I couldn't get Kate's face. It's too well known. Couldn't make her mine. It was always somebody else's, or even hers, always Kate or something. So I needed to get rid of that, and then hopefully you can bear it. I was trying to make a Venus.
Now, in some respects, this should be the most politically charged pavilion in the whole of the Biennale. Inside, there are 2 Serbian artists whose work I think is rather bland. One shows 2 towers of Babel made out of terracotta, the other shows paintings of feathers. I suppose if they'd done work that was very bellicose, it would cause an uproar. But with a nice twist, next door in the adjacent Austrian pavilion, there's an artist collective that is doing work that is inspired by the Kosovan refugees. It's a social programme. Meanwhile, over on the Giudecca, rumour has it that the distinguished British sculptor, Sir Anthony Caro, is making a much grander statement about war. Why The Last Judgment? Where did that idea come from?
I don't know even that The Last Judgment is the right title. Maybe we're living inside a Last Judgment. Maybe it's not a Last Judgment which is going to be in the indeterminate future when we're all dead and returning or anything. Maybe it's just what we're undergoing, how we're living with Kosovo and with the general mess that we're in.
How have you set the Last Judgment up? How have you set this sculpture up? Just take us through it.
Well, you walk through the bell tower, and I made the bell actually later than the rest of it because I felt that it was necessary to have that sort of entrance. And then you come to something that I call the Door of Death, and then various events like Charon who ferried the souls across the River Styx, something I call Confession, Prisoners, the Unknown Warrior, the Unknown Soldier, Skulls, Shades of Night, which is like a nightmare of some sort. I don't think it's any good to try and read an exact message into it because there is none.
So what does the Venice Biennale tell us about the state of international contemporary art? Well, in many ways it just reinforces what we already knew. It's wild, it's weird, it's wonderful, sometimes it's just cranky, and other times it's just plain dull. I think in summary it tells us much more about the state of the international contemporary art world than it does about art itself. But there is a positive flip side to this year's Venice Biennale. Venice itself has become an international tourist theme park over the last few decades. Venice itself is sinking. But out here on the margins of the city, in the dilapidated dockyards, formerly the seat of Venice's great empire and its great power, there is just the faint sign of the shoots of a kind of urban regeneration, with art leading the way, colonising spaces that would otherwise just cave in and fall down. And I think that is the most positive note on this, the 48th Venice Biennale.